Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicola Harvey and I work with TUSLA in Donegal, and I am also a parent support champion. You're welcome to this talk on supporting your child's emotional regulation, which is aimed at parents or caregivers of children aged 6 to 12 years. This presentation was developed as one of a series of workshops delivered to parents at an autism event in Donegal in early November 2024, organised by the Donegal Parent Support Champions. The talk will be delivered by Leanne Brennan, a psychology assistant in the HSE in Donegal. There will be a number of questions at the end. We do hope you find this helpful. Without further ado, I'll pass you over to Leanne.
Hello everyone. My name is Leanne Brennan. I'm a psychologist assistant in Donegal Primary Care Child Psychology Services. And I developed this workshop alongside Dr Karen Espey, who is acting principal psychologist of the service. And we did that for the event in November from the Parent and Support Champions. So this workshop really just focuses on the key areas of emotion regulation. So we start with having a look at understanding the role of emotions in our development, why emotions become easily dysregulated for children and autistic children and adults. And then understanding how we can better self-regulate. So it's looking at those key areas and then better understanding how we can help children to regulate their emotions. So I suppose looking at the kind of biopsychological piece just briefly, when we look at the very left side of the three diagrams in the middle of this slide, you can see that there's three areas lit up: the lizard brain, or the amygdala, or the reptilian brain, as it can often be referred to. And then in the middle, you have a kind of a middle core part of the brain lit up, known as the limbic brain, the middle brain, or also the mammal brain. And then to the right, you have a big surface area lit up in blue, which is known as the neocortex, or also the new brain, or the human brain. So I suppose stemming back throughout history, our lizard brain, or reptilian brain as it's named, I guess is named that because it was so crucial for the survival of our ancestors. So that part of our brain that is connected with, depending on our flight, fight, freeze response, to navigate our environment, which at one point or another in human history was threatening. So you needed to act quickly, not think too much about what was happening, just go make fast decisions. So responding to threat, looking for safety, thinking about eating, mating, survival. So it's in our immediate reactions, and that's quite automatic. And we share that with all animals. And then moving on to our limbic system, and that can also be known as our emotional brain. That's similar in primates and mammals. So we know that, and we know that it's also responsible for memory and regulating emotions. So as we can kind of see and get a grasp of from those diagrams, not all living things share more complicated brains. And certainly as humans, then we stand alone with that last part of our brain, the cerebral cortex, which is also known as our evolved human brain. So that's that part of our equipment that helps us reason, learn, decision-making, reflect, all those kind of higher process thinking skills that we need. That part of our development isn't fully mature until our mid-20s. So we don't get that from birth. We get the other parts of our brain are developed from birth. You know, our ability to react through our flight, fright, freeze response is there from birth. But that higher reasoning part is in development. shockingly, when most people hear it, they're shocked that it's, you know, as late as mid-20s. So if you think about having a flight, fight, freeze response, that can be quite confusing and scary for children who can't necessarily understand the reason why. So that's that piece of, you know, where parents come in and maybe help and fill that gap. They have all that ability to reason and logically understand a situation and whether it's threatening or not, and fill in the gaps for the younger ones who don't necessarily have those abilities yet. So if you think of a time that you're, you know, really you got a fright or you got a stress or there's, you know, a lot happening, you're a bit anxious, the other parts of the brain, that ability, the cerebral cortex, that thinking part of the brain isn't needed and is cut off when we're in flight, fight, freeze. We our you know, amygdala and our you know, reptilian lizard brain comes online, it takes over and it just gets us to do and find safety again. And if you think about a time that you experienced that and somebody asked you to do a task like write a grocery list or you know, do a maths problem, you would struggle to do it. So similarly, if somebody told you to calm down, it doesn't work like that. You can't just go, okay, you know, I'm going to calm down. It sits with you, you're jittery. You need to shake it off first and regulate. So parents fill that gap during development. And as we said before, yeah, the child lacks the ability to reason, maintain control, understand the problem, and take a different action. They're just led by that emotional part of their brain, which they rely on from birth. So as a result, it's normal in children for fear, anger, excitement, joy, all to be felt more intensely. So how do emotions impact behavior? Before we have time to think, emotions signal to our body that we need to take an action, and behavior is the action that we take. So if we think about emotions, we think about the complexity of them, how many we have throughout the day, and then our reactions to that constant change in our emotional state, we can start to understand then that emotions aren't really inherently good or bad, but they're an expression of our feeling and they're guiding every judgment and every decision that we make throughout the day. So they're really crucial. You know, if we woke up in the morning and we had no emotion, you know, how would you respond to your alarm clock and know that you had to go for a shower, know that you were hungry and needed to have breakfast and, you know, get dressed and decide what you're going to wear and how it matches the weather and get out to work on time? You just wouldn't be able to do it. There's emotions driving all those judgments, and we make something like 40,000 judgments a day. So we're navigating our environment through our emotional brain. They're necessary, and other people, our environment, our thoughts all trigger emotions throughout the day. So depending on our stage of development, we may or may not have the tools and the understanding of emotions to take the most appropriate and sophisticated action. You know, we just react, and it's through our reactions and through learning then with others about our reactions that we learn what might be better reactions. But as we're developing, we are starting from that blank slate. We just behave. So this is a nice little visual that just, I suppose, sums up, you know, that idea of bad behavior. The bad behavior iceberg is what we call it. It's really, I suppose, a signal, and it's a nice visual to remember. When we see a behavior, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the end result. Everything else is somewhat hidden. So we're kind of only observing what we're allowed to see. And there could be, you know, a lot unsaid, unknown, unexpressed, that is driving emotion that is resulting in a certain behavior. So if you look at the visual, you know, you can see that there could be shouting, biting, tears, refusal, hitting, hoarding, rage, wetting. There could be lots of behaviors that are just the tip of the iceberg. And when we see behavior and we just react to it as if it's just behavior, we're missing that driving force. We're missing what's happening underneath. And this visual is lovely because it gives you, I guess, a lot of things that are hard to express and hard to understand, especially if you're a child. They're even hard sometimes for adults to understand when they experience them. So there's a lot that can be understood and unknown and unexpressed. So sensory overload, somebody might not understand when they're feeling sensory overload and might not be able to alert people to that. Shame, tiredness, stress in different environments, different life pressures, or maybe it's in different environments, there's different available support. So some environments, you might see more behavior in those environments than in others. So there can be, complicated feelings, different cultures, relationships with peers, family dynamics, different contexts that are hard to put into words. So children lack that insight and to understand, I suppose, the variety of the emotions they experience, and they also lack the language to explain it. So it's better for us as parents to look at behavior as a communication tool. And if you punish then the behavior, it's easy to understand then why, that actually snowballs into a negative effect for all, because quite possibly what we're teaching a child in that moment is not to show emotions or to hold on and not to act in any way that communicates the emotion. And that's certainly not the message we want to share. We want to let them know what's better in terms of behavior around emotion, but we don't want them to not express it at all. And so punishing behavior often has negative effects. So what appears small on top may not be what's underneath them. And it's the job then of the parent to almost, get into detective mode and to investigate beyond that surface. What changes have happened? Is there miscommunication? Is there an accessibility issue? Is there a skills deficit? And one simple one that is always useful is just the check-in HALT. So HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, which is just often something that kids will start to become a bit dysregulated over. So it's a quick one to just go, is this, are we hungry, angry, lonely, tired? And it's a quick kind of check-in with the child. So when we observe dysregulated emotions and our big behaviors, it's kind of, to try to ask yourself, is it possible that the child is processing complicated feelings with less resources available to them than adults have? And that time that, you investigate those barriers or what's getting in the way or what was getting in the way of a better outcome will lead hopefully then to better outcomes going forward. That's the learning for you and the child. So what we're not seeing is friendship issues, environmental stressors, changes to routine. And particularly with autistic kiddies, they might have that in a different internal plan of how that day is going to go. And they might not have said that. So maybe there was a plan of how the day was going, and then there was change. So, a child's stressors may not come naturally to an adult. It's been a long time for the adult since they were a child navigating the world, and we forget. So it's, to try and have fun as well, or, make it light, that investigating and detective piece for yourself and for the child, figuring out what's going on. It's the, I wonder, is it, or I wonder, could it be? It's not saying directly, this is what's happening and this is bad behavior. It's being kind of inquisitive and curious. Again, that's the HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So when I suppose we start to think about behavior and emotions and really kind of keep that relationship to the necessity of expressing emotions through behavior for kids in the fore of our minds, then we can kind of think about, a different way of looking at maybe a challenging behavior or what's happening. And this is a nice little visual that just kind of sums up all the changes that, you know, reframing behavior can have for the parent and the child. So it's a nice quote that just to see a child differently, you see a different child, and that always kind of just, it's a nice one. It just sticks in your head. It just reminds us to reframe sometimes. You know, the two guys on the screen there, is it a 6 or a 9? And it really depends on where you're standing, what your perspective. So this, in this way, I suppose knowledge is power, and understanding behavior and emotions is power. It helps parents to kind of step to the other side and see from a different perspective. So there's another quote by Ross Green at the top: kids do well if they can. And certainly being able to regulate emotions is, you know, a fundamental building block of that, being able to do well. So, you know, regulating your emotions and learning that skill doesn't happen overnight. And if a child doesn't have that skill, that doesn't mean that it's going to lead to bad outcomes. That skill can be learned at any point, and certainly it is what helps them thrive. So thinking about behavior and emotions in terms of won't versus can't yet. And if we can remember to think of the can't yet, it keeps us in that detective mode. It keeps us curious. It keeps us thinking, I wonder, is it this? You know, and it's easier on the parent too, because I think when we think, oh, they won't, or they're just going against me, or they're not cooperating, you know, we're in that judgment place. And our curiosity, we're not curious about our child in that moment. Our view of the child is that they're willful or they're being defiant, and that can feel very defeatist or disheartening. But if we think of it as, well, they can't yet, we're thinking, okay, well, is there too many stressors getting in the way? Is there a skills deficit? And it changes how we see the behavior, and we also don't take it personally. So, you know, that changes our thoughts from they're just being lazy to what's getting in the way, or how can I help? And that changes us then, our response from kind of, you know, rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior to, you know, finding barriers and removing barriers. And overall then the child's experience goes from kind of, you know, being a bit frustrated with their parent or feeling guilt or shame about not being able to do something to, you know, feeling supported and seen, understood, and that relationship being strengthened, you know, because I suppose the shame or the guilt or the blame, that all, you know, comes back at some point for everyone. So, you know, removing that is very powerful. It's perhaps the won't versus the can't yet. Yeah, so I'll move on now to the next slide. Oh, just to say, I suppose, with this as well, that, you know, this reframing, when we're doing actively reframing behavior, that in itself is modeling for children. So if you were, you know, if you can imagine, if you were described with negative traits, you'd feel negative about yourself, you know. So children are the same. The traits that you ascribe to them either create a positive self-image or a negative one. So reframing really does help them to learn and understand themselves better. And it's modeling that very kind of, I suppose, healthy understanding of themselves. So dysregulated emotions then, yeah, our bodies, I guess, are amazing. They do all sorts of amazing things that, you know, we don't even have, we're not aware of. They're regulating us all the time. They're regulating our temperature, our hormones, our sugar levels. You know, the body it looks after itself and knows what to do. But we, you know, in terms of our emotions, it's also somewhat unconscious. You know, we learn it from our caregivers, we kind of learn to self-soothe by the time we're 2 years old. So we're not, that 2-year-old isn't consciously going out to make an effort to learn how to regulate emotions. It's kind of the same. It's just kind of built in. We know that that's what we do. We take that in at a very early age. But it can be harder for some children, and it can be harder particularly for neurodiverse children to learn the skills of regulating. And I suppose some challenges as well is that, you know, once children go to school, once they're at school age, you know, and before that, your parents aren't always there, they can't always be there. But the reason I suppose this, you know, the learning from caregivers at a young age is important is because it does help develop this kind of internal compass and toolbox that the child doesn't realize that they have, but starts to lean on without knowing. It's again, it's not a conscious thing, but there's like an internal compass that, you know, people can become aware of when they're dysregulated. Sometimes people know what they need to do, sometimes they don't. And so that's what we're talking about when we mention this internal compass. So a child's capacity to develop the skills impacts, you know, every aspect of their life. It's their family relationships, their peer relationships, school, their mental health, and overall then their ability to thrive in a complex world. So we want them to have that skill, but it can take many years for them to really be able to self-regulate on their own. That's where we're going, and it's a different path for everybody. So regular practice, not perfection, but regular practice is what helps, you know, that child learn, or any child learn, the skills of regulation. That becomes muscle memory. So anyone can be angry, that's easy, you know, but being angry at the right person, you know, at the right time, to the right degree, for the right reasons, that's very, very difficult. That involves a lot of self-control, that involves a lot of kind of knowing yourself, knowing why you're reacting, and deciding how to engage with that. So that's a real skill. And like we said before about the brain, you know, the brain is still developing all the way up into our mid-20s. So we're never expecting a 2-year-old to just be fully, you know, able to regulate and not need more assistance throughout childhood from their parents. So I suppose when we're regulated, our emotions come and go, and they guide us to take a certain action, and then they subside, and they don't get in the way of our day-to-day tasks and our goals. So that's how we know we're regulated. We can kind of tolerate the fluctuations, the variety, the kind of up and down of the day, which is normal. We can ride that wave and know that this emotion means I have to do this, that emotion means I have to do another thing, and kind of go with it throughout the day. But when we're dysregulated, knowing what to do, when and how, all of that can be more challenging. So I know this slide is kind of a little bit hard to see. I'll just read out the 2 quotes. So dysregulation deviates from typical experience of emotion. They come, but getting back to the equilibrium after is much harder. And when our emotions are dysregulated, the action we take may not necessarily lead to a subsiding of emotions, but instead it can lead to us doing, you know, I suppose, engaging in dysregulated behaviors, which can worsen the dysregulation in kind of a negative cycle. So regulation isn't about getting away from an uncomfortable feeling, but the ability to be with it and know that you're still going to be okay. So adults, I suppose, can understand the source of their emotion better. They can get overwhelmed and they can act out, and they might not realize, you know, that actually that they're about to get overwhelmed, or, you know, stress can creep up. So, you know, adults aren't immune. They can definitely still experience outbursts in an argument, look for quick fixes. They can do things like engage maybe in impulsive behavior, like maybe spending, or they can feel kind of unsure of themselves, or a bit indecisive, maybe making more mistakes, or don't connect to the, you know, they don't necessarily connect these bits and pieces either to the load that they're carrying. So sometimes they don't actually connect that this is actually, you know, because I'm feeling a bit more stressed. So as well, you know, excitement, it's not always stress, but just to make sure to mention that it can be happy emotions. That can even be too difficult sometimes for people. You know, if you're really excited about something, it can be too distracting, and we can avoid emotions, both good and bad, in lots of ways if they're intense and they kind of disrupt our day-to-day tasks. So when we're regulated, we can and do behave differently. Okay. So this then is like a little handy tool just to use with anything really. This is, you know, anxiety based. So 0 green is no distress, totally relaxed, up to 100, which is highest anxiety and distress you've ever felt. But this can be used for you know, feeling mad, bad, sad, you know, you're all the emotions you can use to kind of gauge where we're at, you know, if it's a tolerable level, or if we're getting quite dysregulated and it's harder to actually come back down then. So we can use this kind of visual to help children name and understand, I suppose, the fact that emotion goes up and down. It's just something you can stick on the fridge, and you can, you know, ask a child to kind of point where they're at today, or, you know, and just to kind of get used to or familiarize themselves with this idea that it goes up and down and it moves, it doesn't stay. So with any tool we learn to name and help regulate our emotions isn't any good either if we're just kind of whipping it out when we're already in the red zone. This is kind of like a nice activity to be doing on the regular anyway, and certainly alongside maybe trying to bring naturally into everyday family time, just discussion about emotions, not necessarily in a very, you know, serious way, but just kind of indirectly. Maybe you're watching something on the TV or watching a movie, and you might, you know, follow up with, well, you know, how did you think that person felt, or, you know, or what made you think that they felt this way? And it's a good way to just kind of start to name more emotions and get familiar with more variety of emotions. But yeah, we have to become kind of familiar with them when we're in that kind of green, calm, regulated place where we're alert, we're awake, we're able to concentrate, we're able to learn when we're in that green zone. So kind of when emotion is really intense, those teaching moments are going to be harder to have. So it's a nice tool as well for parents to remember about when and where to have those conversations. So how to spot dysregulated emotions? It's different for everybody. You might not see your child here, or you might, but this is just kind of, you know, an overall broad description. So they can be fluctuating from emotion to emotion quickly. And then there can be intensity of uncontrolled emotions, avoidance of one's own emotions as well, the opposite end. They can have poor ways of letting others know. So you might see bad behavior, acting out, things that we classically call bad behavior and acting out more often. Poor ways of figuring out how we feel, so why we're feeling it and what to do, often then results in, you know, a meltdown or overwhelm. So I think every parent has kind of had that experience of, you know, saying to themselves, well, that's the kind of laughing or hyperness that is going to end in tears, you know, that there's something kind of too much intensity behind it. And then tantrums, meltdowns, acting silly, out of control. So then regulating big emotions, I guess this is just a reminder for yourselves as parents to be aware that some emotions are harder to be with. than others, and reflecting on those emotions can be really helpful for parents, you know, because you can identify what's harder for you, you know, and plan for that accordingly then, you know, and be patient with yourself and the child whenever that emotion is there, and that the child needs support to regulate that particular emotion. You know, some people you know, struggle to be around anxiety, for example, and feel quite anxious when anyone else is anxious, and that's hard for them then to remain calm and to help the other person regulate. But that can be any emotion. So it's just to reflect on that as parents, what might be harder to be with. And that can make us then feel a bit helpless or useless if another person's anxiety rubs off on us, for example. Being with doesn't necessarily mean you have to have physical contact or you have to say the right thing. It just means being there and accepting. So it kind of takes the pressure off parents, you know, when you're met with an emotion that you struggle to help your child regulate with. It's just to remember that you don't have to make that emotion just, you know, you don't have to have the right solution right there. It's just being there. And I think we've all, you know, had the experience at some point or other where if you're upset and, you know, you start to tell somebody why, and, you know, straight away they're kind of pulling you or rushing you along, pushing you into a solution. You know, why don't you go on a walk? Or you know, just before you've even really had a chance to say properly what you're feeling, you're straight being offered a solution, and that can feel very different from speaking with somebody who says nothing and just listens and maybe sits by your side and puts their arm over your shoulder and just, you know, lets you know that they get it. And you don't necessarily have any solution, but you come away from that just feeling heard and understood. And so, you know, it's just to remember that it's very simple sometimes what helps people regulate back down, and it isn't, you know, solution focused. It can be sometimes, but most of the time we're just looking to regulate. So this is a nice little slide that just helps us remember that. So when little people are overwhelmed with big emotions, it's our job to share our calm and not join their chaos. And so parents, you know, like that, there can be some behaviors or emotions that are just harder to be around for whatever reason. And it's noticing that and going, okay, you know I need to actually take a minute, take a breath, take time out to have time back in. And doing that for yourself, that's the message, you know, that part of modeling you minding your own emotions is very important as well. So how do we regulate? Again, it's a lot simpler than sometimes what we think, and it's mostly through relationships. There's lots of stuff that we can do that is good for regulation. You know, movement and calming activities are all very useful. But a lot of the relational stuff is very simple and it takes a few minutes. And oftentimes we think that if we stop everything to deal with this, we're going to be, you know, delayed, or it's going to, you know, take more time than we think. But actually sometimes if we do sit and help regulate, everything else then can kind of be picked back up again a lot quicker, because it doesn't kind of build and build or result in a tantrum or a meltdown or a fight, which is not always easy to do, and it's not always, your parents aren't always able to sit straight away or drop what they're doing and help a child regulate. But when emotions are high, it's just about remembering to pause, inhale, exhale, slow everything right down, observe the situation as a third person, which is to say, to maybe you know, take your own feelings, recognize that it's dysregulation, not take things personally, turn towards your child, soften your face, look gently into their eyes, reach out and hold each other, touch, or stand by nearby with a safe presence. So we understand, I suppose, that regulating isn't easy, and when there's frequent meltdowns, but the skills of regulating are, aren't complicated. I suppose that's the one bit of comfort, is that meltdowns can be frequent, and it can be really hard to feel like you're getting anywhere. But it's just to remember that the skills of regulating don't have to be complicated, and aren't. And they can be very simple, and it is something that we do, and parents do without realizing. And we're all, I suppose, guilty of being able to probably do more for ourselves than we do to help keep ourselves regulated. So nobody is walking around perfectly regulated all the time. That's just not human, unfortunately. But it is important for our relationships and our well-being and our ability to thrive that we recognize being dysregulated and then know what to do. So what are the hurdles? There's lots of hurdles. There's life stressors, there's bereavements, changing schools, moving house, any big change, particularly for neurodiverse autistic kiddies. That can be, change is hard. Poor sleep hygiene, losing sleep, any illness or interruption to routine, again, very important to some neurodiverse kids. Smart devices, social media, coming into puberty years, hormone fluctuations, sensory needs, and low environmental predictability. So, everybody's more regulated when they know what to expect and everything's predictable. Neurodiversity, autism and ADHD, I suppose that the stress bucket, does fill that bit, differently for different neurotypes. So the neurodivergent, that stress bucket can be full. There could be a day at school where there was just a lot going on. And sometimes we don't notice with neurodiverse kids as much or as easily when that stress bucket, they're masking so well. We don't see that it's full, and we need to like open up those taps and let some of that out. So they might find it as well harder to tell us when it's full and lack the skills to cope. Mental health conditions like anxiety also, make it harder to keep regulated. It's constant challenge. And dysregulated parents are parents modeling maybe more maladaptive coping, parent traps, which I'll speak to next. So yeah, kind of excessive reassurance and comfort, overprotectiveness, excessive problem solving, dismissing, criticism, impatience, and modeling, monkey see, monkey do. So those are, I suppose, common enough. So it's just to say that if you feel like you've done any of these, this is not something, we're not looking for perfection. You don't have to be getting it right all the time. Everybody slips up. That's why we have this slide up here. And it's really about, I suppose, remembering that they don't help in the moment. We can try redirect ourselves when we're trying to regulate, and we're trying to develop the skills of regulating in our children. These things might be, stumbling blocks and holding us back. We do them, but there should be no shame or blame or guilt about that they're dead end streets. Your parents are human, slip-ups happen, and we only have to be getting this right. 30% of the time is good enough for it to be learned. So our modeling isn't just, I suppose, our external go-to behaviors, but also as well our internal modeling. So that monkey see, monkey do. When we're talking about that internal modeling, it's our ability ourselves as parents to be with and self-regulate. And when we react in a way that's excessive, and when we join in the chaos and don't share our calm, we lose those connection moments and teaching moments. So that modeling is really about, modeling our own self-care, our own prioritizing our own self-regulation. So what can you do then to help your child? Number one is taking care of yourselves. You know, supporting big feelings can be difficult. Typically, it's most effective when parents take some time to regulate themselves first, or enter in, you know, from a regulated place. And from there, it's easier then to help, you know, a child name and identify feelings. It's very hard to do if a parent is struggling to regulate themselves. It's very hard to be with and be the detective, share the calm, you know, that just makes it a lot more challenging. So helping them then identify the feelings, including everyday conversation, you know, making a game out of guessing, like I spoke about, you know, on TV, watching movies, or, you know, just making games out of it, you know, guessing emotions. All of that is helpful to kind of grow that vocabulary. Managing meltdowns then, I suppose, like we discussed, you know, with the bad behavior, dropping those maybe traditional discipline approaches, because they're ineffective in the red zone. If you remember the thermometer, they don't work there. Allowing time for it to run its course, model by remaining calm, and just using simple communication, definitely avoiding direct demands. You can encourage positive behavior that you know will help, but then giving space and reassurance. And then making a plan together for, you know, using the thermometer, playing to their needs of a child, especially if a child is autistic, and like structure, you know, that's something you can really structure then. What will we do when we encounter this, and how do we calm down? Kind of having a plan in place might play into their strengths. Making a calming down checklist or a choice board, for example, as well, so they have options, and including things like, you know, breathing exercises like the 5-finger breathing, which is a really easy one. You're just doing your 5-finger breathing, you know, breathing in and breathing out. And they can do that as well under the desk in school. They can be discreet about that. And that's just something that they can always do themselves in the car, wherever they're going. And then progressive muscle relaxation, grounding exercise. There's loads of, when you start to kind of look into those strategies as well, you find more of them. And then just general strategies if the child is an autistic child. Structure, routine, and predictability really help. Warnings and countdowns in relation to transitions. That's from one place to another, but also from one activity to another, particularly coming off devices or gaming and going to something else, like meantime. Social stories, for example, help prepare them for new experiences. And there's loads of online templates. Staying calm, so really calm communication and language. Reducing demands, using visual aids, having options, picking your battles, I suppose deciding what's really important, what really matters, if it's done or if it isn't done, you know, so really choosing your battles, particularly if there's signs of overwhelm, and being aware of sensory load. And then we've kind of touched on this, modeling. How did you persuade your child to read instead of playing on a smart device? The response is children don't hear us, they imitate us. And that's really true of regulation, emotion regulation. They will be looking up to their caregivers and the adults around them for how they regulate, and taking from that what's right, what's wrong, what's normal, what's expected, what's accepted, what's not. So it's about modeling for them your own self-regulation. So a dysregulated child cannot be comforted by a dysregulated adult. When children get older, they're more influenced then by peers. But in early development, they're like sponges with their caregivers. So positive role modeling in that way, and modeling self-regulation. This is kind of the final slide. So this is just, I suppose, a stairwell of, the journey for, I suppose, a parent guiding their child to learning the skill of self-regulation. As you can see, the very first fundamental step that you'll take is your own self-regulation. Your own ability to self-care and self-soothe is what you'll be modeling. And if you struggle with that, taking time to prioritize that will only benefit everybody. So that's that kind of first step, that only from there really can a parent and child co-regulate together. As we talked about before, we mentioned it can be easy to share in the chaos. And when we share in the chaos, everyone's thermometers are going up and up and up and up. So there's tools for that, helping name emotions where we start, building up the toolbox that helps us manage dysregulation, so the calming exercises, reframing behavior, doing our investigative piece, responding and not reacting. So, we can all become detectives and kind of notice when we're not regulated, when we're stressed, frustrated, worried. What was the cause? What helped us recover? And that kind of tuning into what you're feeling in your own body, what you're thinking, what emotion this might be. This awareness kind of invites people to remember then that, well, actually there is something I can do, and that's quite empowering, that's quite adaptive, that there's something that can be done to change the state that I'm in, and that's what you're modeling. And then the final step is the child's self-regulation. So learning to self-soothe. It's that learning that, okay, actually there was something that I could do there to change how I felt, through connection, love, openness, acceptance, and the relationship that you foster by co-regulating helps you manage those tricky times. So connection and connection through fun. That's probably one of the quickest ways, to connect through fun. So any questions?
Hi, Leanne. Leanne, thanks so much for that. That was really informative. And I think, I suppose for many parents, it give a lot of hope as well that, there's a lot there that they're doing well already, and it's about increasing that piece as well. So no, that was really informative. I just have a few wee questions here. I suppose one is, where is the line between bad behavior and dysregulation? How would parents know where the difference is?
Okay, so yeah, I suppose, we were talking before about, teaching moments. And when I suppose there is the line, it's something that comes up a lot, but it's really about taking that step back as to how we look, first of all, at bad behavior. So it's helping, I think, them understand that everybody gets mad. It's, but it's okay, to be mad, but maybe, that teaching moment of, it's not okay though to break things, or it's not okay to hit somebody, that those lines are there. But it doesn't mean that from the get-go you kind of change your tact. I think it's, you do see the emotion and you honor the emotion. Everyone gets mad, or I know you're disappointed and this thing happened that shouldn't have happened. But if you're calm and then they calm down, you can have the conversation then about, but it's not okay to X, Y, or Z, so you're helping them to understand that the feeling is normal, but the reaction is not okay. And there absolutely then can be consequences. But I suppose we say consequences, but not punishments, because learning is, how we do things better, teaching that and going back over it. That's the learning, active learning piece that comes from those encounters where we're managing behavior and emotion. So it's just to kind of fall back on the reframing the behavior. You can have that conversation, but in the middle of the behavior and the emotion, you can't have that teaching moment at all with them, you know. So it's just about taking it back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just another one here is, what should a parent or caregiver do when language seems to be the trigger or make things worse, or the child rejects the parent or caregiver's attempts to regulate them?
Yeah. So I suppose like that, if a child pushes you away, um, you know, blocks the hug, doesn't want to listen, closes the door, just to take their lead, you know, but don't leave them. Stay in the periphery. So that can be hard. It might feel like rejection. You know, some parents might leave in that dysregulated moment. But trying to remember, okay, this is the dysregulation. And, you know, I suppose when they're overwhelmed, they might just be in the place where they can't receive what you're trying to do just yet. In, you know, a few minutes, they might have gone back down, you know, to a level where, yeah, they might want the hug. It just might be that it's all still too much, you know, when they are overwhelmed and dysregulated. So they might not want the attempts. They might just not be ready for it yet. And rebuffing then is all that they know. So just to stay in the periphery and notice that, you know, it is dysregulation, that upstairs brain, you know, is offline. It's not bad behavior, and or their real feelings about you as a parent in that moment. So the message then that you just want to send is, you're not alone, I'm here. And just, I suppose, yeah, holding off any complicated language. So use your own everyday language, use your own words, because if you're not yourself, they're not going to have any comfort in you. If you're coming in using all these different words that they've never heard before, they can't be comforted then by that. So there's lots of new words gathered in presentations and workshops like this, but they're for the adults. So, you know, don't jump in with kind of that reasoning side of things. And this is happening because you're dysregulated. You know, they're not going to be ready to learn or hear that, especially until they've calmed. So it's time just to be, you know, the safe pair of hands, you know, and just be there for them. Parents can absolutely feel overwhelmed as well. So they can feel rejected. They might need to take a minute to calm, leave and come back, you know, and that's, as I said, time out for time back in, you know.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm.
And I suppose, like a lot, we were kind of focusing in around that 6 to 12 age group today as well. But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, where when a child reaches their teenage years, would there be any differences to the advice that you would be given to parents or caregivers around how to manage dysregulation?
Yeah, it's just really, you know, yeah, they're at a different developmental stage in adolescence. So whether, you know, a child is autistic or not, or, you know, it's really about just honing in on their preferred method of communication. So they might prefer, you know, to regulate in their own time and space, you know, and just being available to them to help with that. So not leaving them, say, you know, with any distress. So staying kind of physically present in the home, but maybe, you know, not being going in with the direct, you know, questions or statements, you know. So absolutely kind of be there, let them know you're there. But if you can kind of more cleverly, I suppose, with teens, just let things naturally evolve, be physically there, but use indirect ways. So we can, you know, with teens maybe sometimes respond to things like, you know, getting them to come for an errand in the car, and, you know, they're sitting side by side, you know, it's not direct. And certainly it isn't going in and asking, you know, well, there's something, what's wrong with you? Because, you know, you're in a wild mood. That might just let the, you know, the walls go up. even more, because at that stage your development, teens are a bit more, they're looking for that autonomy, they're trying to figure things out on their own a bit more. So but you're just, again, it's the same thing, being a detective, tapping into their preferred means of communication. Some teens as well might, you know, have preferential forms of letting you know that something's wrong, and it might just be like a text that just has an emoji, and that might be easier to explain something, or just let you know or make you aware. So you're kind of meeting them at, you know, their developmental stage. You're less likely with teens to get, you know, meaningful verbal explanation of what's going on, and they might do better as well if you try something like getting them up and moving, you know, taking the dog for a walk. Movement, movement changes things anyway, changes our state. So sometimes that just allows you to walk side by side for things to kind of calm down, to connect again, and then be ready to maybe have a chat about what happened. So that's kind of, you're kind of being a bit more indirect maybe with teens, just meeting them where they're at, getting to know what they're interested in can help, you know, and just using that as an indirect way to talk about emotions, you know.
Okay. Thank you, Leanne.
You're
I
very
suppose
welcome.
I'm going to share just at the end. I'm just going to share. Hopefully, I can get it up. It's some local resources. There's the Donegal Parent Hub, which has a services section for parents here in Donegal. If you go into the services, you can look up what supports are out there in the community. But I'm wondering, and I'm also just going to, I suppose, share the parenting platform that this talk is on as well, because there's lots of talks on there for parents on different topics and issues.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can just talk about, you know, maybe what information might be there, or where would you signpost parents for more information? And in the meantime, I'll share here as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so yeah, there's some lovely books and there's, I suppose, a couple of websites that I would highlight for parents. I'm just reading off my own kind of resource list here, but Middletown Centre for Autism, they have a lot of kind of best practice approaches for, you know, managing emotional dysregulation and anxiety. Similarly, As I Am also have lots of resources online for parents of younger kids and teens. And then there's some other good websites that we signpost people to. I recommend Anxiety Canada if anxiety is more a concern for a child, and then some nice books as well. I'll just name off a few. What to Do When You Worry Too Much is a lovely book. The Worosaurus, Binny the Baboon, it was a Karen Treisman book. And then yeah, there's the autism discussion page as well for kids that, you know, with a diagnosis of autism. The autism discussion page by Bill Nason. And then some kind of specific and non-specific apps. You know, there's Smiling Mind and Stop, Breathe and Think Kids. That's kind of a younger one. There's also Well Beyond Meditation for Kids, Mind Yeti. So there's a few apps like that that also can be useful and can be incorporated. I think that's kind of just a few of the top ones that we would recommend. And obviously, As I Am in Middletown are obviously, you know, for kids who have a diagnosis of autism.
Okay. Yeah, and look, thank you so much for today. That's been really helpful, and parents will have access to it on the parent platform going forward. But just again, thank you, and I hope parents do find the tips that they've got here today very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks very much.